You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you, my daughter said at her wedding reception. I just smiled. I was waiting for this. I waved to a waiter and a video started playing on the TV. I made the shrew faint when I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I've been married twice, buried one husband, and raised 3 children. At 65, I thought I'd seen every shade of human cruelty. I was wrong. The Lakeside Country Club ballroom buzzed with the kind of joyful excitement that only wedding receptions can bring. Crystal glasses clinked softly against fine china, and the low murmur of congratulatory conversations filled the elegant space. My daughter Rebecca, in her stunning white gown, stood at the center of the dance floor, beaming with the confidence of a bride who'd just begun her perfect life. The pride swelling in my chest felt almost too big for my ribs to contain. "Mom Evelyn, did you see Uncle Robert's face during the vows?" Rebecca leaned toward me earlier, her eyes bright with excitement. "I think I actually made him tear up." I reached over and squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth she'd earned from years of hard work as a marketing executive. "You've always had a gift with words, sweetheart. Your father would have been so proud." That's when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Oh, please. The voice cut through our moment like a blade through silk. All heads turned toward Rebecca, who sat rigid in her chair with that particular smile she reserved for moments when she planned to draw blood. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped her champagne flute so tightly I worried it might shatter. "Rebecca," my son warned quietly. She stood slowly, deliberately, her designer gown catching the chandelier light as she turned to face me. The conversations at nearby tables began to fade as people sensed the shift in our little corner of the ballroom. "You want to know what I... This woman," she pointed directly at me, "has been playing the... You want to know what your precious mother really is, Nathan? She's a fraud, a pathetic old woman who can't even dress appropriately for... You say the wrong things. You dress like you shop at thrift stores, and you have no idea how to conduct yourself around people." She turned back to me, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes that went beyond mere dislike. It was contempt, pure and simple. "I have carried the embarrassment of being associated with you for 15 years. 15 years of making excuses, of trying to minimize the damage you caused. I look at you and I feel sick to my stomach that you're supposed to be family." The words hit me like physical blows, but something strange happened in that moment. Instead of the shame and hurt I might have expected to feel, a calm settled over me. A peaceful, almost pleasant calm. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, nothing dramatic or obvious, just a small, satisfied curve of my lips. I reached into my purse with steady hands and pulled out my phone. With deliberate movements, I caught the eye of Luis, our usual waiter, and gave him a subtle nod. "What are you doing?" Rebecca demanded, some of her confidence wavering as she noticed my composure. I didn't answer. The soft wedding playlist that had been playing faded out, replaced by the distinctive sound. But yes, there she was, crystal clear in high definition, sitting in what was clearly a lawyer's office. The timestamp showed a date from just 6 months ago. "So you want to completely sever all ties?" The lawyer's voice came. The blood left Rebecca's face so quickly I thought she might faint right there. She stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the table for support. "What is this?" Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. She collapsed into her chair with such force that it slid backward. Ever since the private investigator I'd hired delivered that recording to my kitchen table, along with a manila folder full of other materials that had made my hand... I wasn't expecting anyone, but at my age, unexpected visitors usually meant either someone selling... His handshake was firm but gentle, and his eyes held the kind of weariness that comes from seeing too much of humanity. Gladys's cousin worked as a receptionist there. She'd said, "Family law practice. Please come in." I'd asked him to look into why Rebecca might be visiting a lawyer. I've learned that the truth, no matter how ugly, is always better than living with a beautiful lie. He nodded slowly and opened the folder. The first document was a legal petition dated 18 months earlier. As I read the head, Rebecca had voluntarily terminated her parental rights to a son from a previous relationship, not because she was young and unprepared, not because of financial hardship. Tyler had been 15 when Rebecca abandoned him, left in the care of an elderly grandfather who died just 2 years later. The boy had aged out of the foster system, with no family support, no college fund, no safety net. Tyler had Nathan's eyes, the same warm brown that came from my son Michael's side of the family. He had Rebecca's strong jawline, but there was something in his expression that was entirely his own. A weariness, a strength that spoke of someone who'd learned too young that the world could be a cold and unforgiving place. He has no idea that Rebecca remarried and had the life that Tyler never got to have. The room felt like I wasn't sure I could take another revelation, but I nodded for him to continue. Tyler was getting too old, too independent, starting to ask questions about his. Had that all been performance? Was she capable of loving any child? Or was Nathan just young enough still to be? I watched it that night alone in my living room with the curtains drawn and the door locked. Watching Rebecca sit in that lawyer's office and speak about her own son with such cold detachment made me physically. She'd made sure there would be no way for Tyler to contact her in the future, no way for her past to interfere with her new life with Michael and Nathan. She had erased her own son with the same casual efficiency that someone might delete old files from a computer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tyler working 2 jobs. I thought about Nathan, the grandson Rebecca doted on so publicly, and wondered what would happen if he ever became. But what? How do you tell your son that his wife is not who she pretends to be? How do you explain that the woman he loves discarded her own son like trash? More importantly, how do you make He lived in a small apartment that cost most of his income, but he was making it work through sheer force of will. I also had Victor continue monitoring Rebecca's activities. I wanted to know if there were other secrets, other victims of her particular brand of cold calculation. What he found was Tyler was her only child before Michael, but she had systematically isolated herself from anyone who knew her past, anyone who might contradict the image she wanted to project. Former friends, distant relatives, even her own aunt, all cut off without. I spent weeks agonizing over what to do with this information. Should I tell Michael immediately? Should I contact Tyler? Should I confront Rebecca directly? But then I remembered something my first husband used to say. The best way to catch a liar is to let them keep talking. So I waited, I watched, I documented, and I started planning for the day. The video continued playing as Rebecca lay unconscious, her head resting on the white tablecloth like she'd simply decided to take a nap in the middle of her own destruction. The ballroom staff had moved quickly to clear the nearby tables, but not quickly enough to prevent half the country club from witnessing my daughter's most carefully guarded secret. On screen, Rebecca's voice continued with that same cold detachment. I don't want him to be able to find me ever. As far as the world is concerned, Tyler Jenkins is not my son. Michael sat frozen in his chair, staring at the screen like he was watching a foreign film without subtitles. She lifted her head slowly, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, looking around the ballroom like she couldn't quite remember where she was. Then her gaze landed on the projection screen, and reality crashed back into her face like a physical blow. "Turn it off," she whispered, then louder, more frantic. "Turn it off." He looked to me and I gave him the slightest shake of my head. "Please." Rebecca turned to face our table, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, her designer gown wrinkled from her collapse. This is out of context. You don't understand." "Then explain it to us." I could feel the weight of dozens of conversations that had stopped mid-sentence, the electricity of social drama that would be dissected in living rooms across the city for months to come. Rebecca's voice cracked. She looked desperately at Michael, searching his face for some sign that he might still be on her side. "He's my son from before I met your father." "Your son?" Michael's voice was flat, emotionless. It was a long time ago, before you and I got together. It was complicated, Michael. You don't understand what my life was like then. On screen, the lawyer's voice continued the conversation we were all hearing for the first time. And you're certain you want to include the clause preventing any future contact? This is quite permanent, Miss Jenkins. Completely certain, Rebecca's recorded voice replied. How old was he when you did this? Rebecca's eyes. I watched this exchange with the detached fascination of someone observing a carefully planned experiment. For months, I'd wondered how Rebecca would explain herself when confronted with the truth. I'd imagined various scenarios, different excuses she might use. I hadn't expected her to be quite this clumsy about it. What made me different? The question clearly caught Rebecca off guard. Actually, Rebecca, according to the court documents, you were 28 when you signed away your rights to Tyler, hardly a child yourself. The silence that followed my words was so complete, I could hear the kitchen staff clatter. I hired a private investigator after hearing about Rebecca visiting a law office downtown. I wanted to know what she was hiding. You had me investigated, Rebecca's voice pitched high. And what should we do if Tyler Jenkins ever tries to contact you in the future? Rebecca's recorded voice was crystal clear in her response. Tell him I'm dead. Don't you see? It was better for him to have a clean break, to be able to move on without wondering why I left. This way he could grieve and heal. You wanted to start fresh with Michael and Nathan, and Tyler was an inconvenience. That's not true. Tyler looked tired in the picture, wearing a warehouse uniform, walking to his car in an empty parking lot at 3 a.m. Rebecca's voice faltered. He's working 2 jobs to put himself through community college, I continued. He lives in a studio apartment that costs 3/4 of his income. He has no family, no support system, no safety net of any kind, because his mother decided he was an inconvenience. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heart. On the screen, the video had finally ended, replaced by the wedding slideshow as if nothing had happened. Finally, he nodded and stood up. This isn't over, Rebecca said, her voice taking on a hard edge as she watched her family preparing to leave her sitting alone. You think you've won something here, Evelyn? You think destroying my marriage makes you the hero? I gathered my purse and stood to follow my son and grandson. Before I left, I turned back. As we walked through the ballroom toward the exit, I could feel dozens of eyes following our progress. Tomorrow, this story would spread through every social circle that mattered to Rebecca. Her carefully constructed image as the perfect daughter and wife would be replaced by... The real battle was just starting. The first shot in Rebecca's counterattack came exactly 48 hours after the wedding reception incident, delivered in the form of a heartbroken phone call from my youngest daughter, Laura, who lived 3 states away. Mom, I was in my garden deadheading tulips in the early morning quiet when the careful way Laura spoke told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca had gotten to her first, had painted herself as the victim and me as the villain. I could practically hear the script my daughter had used, probably the same one. There was a pause, and when Laura spoke again, her voice was smaller. Did you really do that? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of having to a son she abandoned when the boy was 15 years old. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, Mom, that seems extreme, even for someone you don't like. Are you sure you're not misunderstanding something? And there it was. The seed Rebecca had planted was already taking root. My own daughter was questioning my judgment, my motives, my version of events. This was how Rebecca operated. I'd learned that much from Victor's investigation. She didn't just abandon people. She systematically destroyed their credibility, first making sure that when the truth came out, it would be dismissed as the vindictive lies of someone with an agenda. After I hung up with Laura, I sat in my garden for a long time, watching the sun climb higher in the sky and thinking about warfare. Most people think battles are won with dramatic gestures, big moments of triumph. But Rebecca understood something more sophisticated. She knew that the most effective way to win a war was to make your enemy defeat themselves. By the time my neighbor Gladys came by for our usual afternoon tea, I'd received similar calls from two cousins, Michael's sister Patricia, and even Nathan's girlfriend Sophia. All of them had heard some version of the same story. Poor Rebecca, victimized by a bitter mother who couldn't accept that her son— "I don't want to take sides," Gladys said carefully as she settled into my kitchen chair. "And when you couldn't find anything really damaging, you took things out of context to make her look bad." Out of context? I couldn't. And Rebecca was young and scared and thought the boy would be better off with other family members who could handle him better. She said the whole situation was more— She said the boy chose to cut contact with the family, that Tyler was angry about the custody arrangement and refused to maintain relationships. By focusing on my violation of privacy rather than what that investigation had uncovered, she'd made me the villain in my own story. That evening, Michael called. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice was careful, controlled in a way that made my stomach clench. This wasn't the voice of a son calling his mother. This was the voice of someone who'd been convinced he needed to manage a difficult situation. "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you want to come over for dinner?" "Actually, I think it would be better if we met somewhere neutral. How about that coffee shop on Maple Avenue tomorrow at 2? Neutral, as if I were some kind of threat that needed to be contained in a public space. The next afternoon, I arrived at the coffee shop. Michael walked in exactly at 2, and the way he moved, purposeful, resigned, told me this: "No matter what you found out, that wasn't the way to handle it." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "And what would have been the right way, Michael?" "You should have come to me privately. We could have talked about it as a family, worked through whatever issues you had with my wife." "Issues I had?" I repeated carefully. "Michael, this isn't about me not liking Rebecca. This is about her abandoning her own child." According to Rebecca, the situation with Tyler was more Did she also tell you that Tyler has been working 2 jobs? I stared at my son, seeing Rebecca's handiwork written across his from someone who is capable of abandoning her own child when that child becomes inconvenient. You don't know that's what happened. I know exactly what happened. I have the documentation. Documentation that you obtained by violating her privacy and trust. Michael leaned forward, his voice taking on an edge I'd rarely heard directed at me. "Mom, I need you to understand something. Rebecca is my wife. She's the mother." The words hit me like physical blows. My own son, the child I'd raised and sacrificed for, was defending the woman who'd erased her own son from existence. "So what happens now?" I asked. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Rebecca afraid of me? The woman who'd systematically destroyed a teenage boy's life was afraid of a 65-year-old grandmother who'd simply exposed the truth. "And what about Tyler?" I asked. Michael's expression softened slightly. "If what you say about his situation is true, then maybe we can find a way to help him. But that's something Rebecca and I need to decide together as a family." As a fam. The phrase stung because it made clear exactly. But what she didn't understand was that I'd been fighting battles longer than she'd been alive, and I wasn't nearly finished yet. 2 weeks after my devastating coffee shop conversation with Michael, I was in my kitchen making dinner for. Since the wedding reception incident, my social calendar had become notably lighter as people in my circle tried to navigate the. "My name is Tyler Jenkins. I think we need to talk." My legs nearly gave out. After months of investigation. But when someone hires a private investigator to look into your life, word eventually gets. He paused, his voice catching slightly. What I learned. He was taller than I'd expected from Victor's photos, probably over 6 feet, but there was a presence about him that filled. When I aged out of foster care, I tried to find her. I grieved for her, Mrs. Harper. I spent 3 years going to therapy to. Do you know what it's like to find out that your mother not only abandoned you, but paid someone to make you believe she was dead? The room spun slightly as the full scope of Rebecca's cruelty hit me. It wasn't enough for her to abandon Tyler. She'd had to make sure the boy could never find her, never disrupt her new life. How did you find out the truth? When he started asking questions in Seattle, it got back to the man who used to mow my grandfather's lawn. He remembered me, remembered my situation. He also remembered that my mother had paid him to spread the story about the plane crash if anyone ever came looking. Tyler, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she'd gone that far. It's not your fault. Tyler studied When I finished, Tyler sat quietly for a long time, processing what I'd shared. She has a son, he said finally. My half-brother Nathan, he's 22, just graduated from medical school, and he doesn't know. Complicated how? I hesitated, not wanting to repeat Rebecca's lies, but Tyler needed to know what he was up against. She's telling people you were troubled, that you had substance abuse issues, and were acting out. She's saying she made the difficult decision to let you be raised by family members who could better handle your problems. Tyler's coffee cup hit the table with enough force to slosh liquid over the rim. Substance abuse, acting out. His voice rose with indignation. Mrs. Harper, I was 15 years old, and my mother disappeared from my life without explanation. Tyler stood up and walked to my kitchen window, staring out at the garden where I'd been working when Laura called to tell me about Rebecca's damage control campaign. I want to meet them, he said finally. Who? My half-brother, your son. I want them to hear the truth from me directly. My stomach clenched with worry. Tyler, I don't think that's a good idea. Rebecca has had weeks to prepare them for something like this. She'll have an explanation ready. Then I guess we'll see how convincing her explanations are when I'm standing right there to contradict them. I want my half-brother to know that I exist. I want him to know that our mother is capable of erasing her own children when they become inconvenient, and I want to make sure it never happens to him. The weight of his words settled over the kitchen like dust after an explosion. Tyler wasn't here for revenge or money or even necessarily for reconciliation. He was here to protect a brother he'd never met from a mother who'd already... There's a family barbecue this Saturday, I said slowly, at Michael and Rebecca's house. It's supposed to be a healing gathering to bring everyone together after the reception incident. Will you take me? I thought about Michael's anger about Rebecca's because sometimes the only way to fight a lie is to drag the truth into the same room and let them battle it out face to face. The next Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Midwest weather that makes everything feel heavy and uncertain. Tyler had driven down from Seattle again, this time with a small suitcase, prepared to stay through the weekend if necessary. We sat in my car outside Michael's house for several minutes, watching through the windows as my family moved around inside preparing for their healing gathering. Are you ready for this? I asked Tyler. He smoothed down his simple gray shirt, the kind of outfit someone wears when they want to look respectable but can't afford. A small acknowledgement that my status in this house had changed. When Michael opened the door, his face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, confusion. This is Tyler Jenkins, I said clearly. Your stepson. For a moment, Michael just stood there, mouth slightly open, staring at the young man on his doorstep who shared his son's eyes and his wife's jawline. Hello, Tyler. It's time for a real family reunion. The moment Tyler stepped into Michael's living room, the carefully orchestrated healing gathering transformed into something else entirely. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as relatives who'd been debating my version of events for weeks found themselves face-to-face with living proof of Rebecca's deception. Rebecca stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel still in her hands from cleaning up whatever she'd dropped when she heard. Her face had gone completely white, and for the first, both had inherited Michael's warm brown eyes and expressive eyebrows, though Tyler's were more defined from years of careful grooming on a tight bun. Around the room, family members who'd spent weeks choosing sides found themselves recalibrating everything they thought they knew. That's not possible, Rebecca finally managed, her voice high and thin. Tyler, sweetheart, you know that's not true. You were angry when I remarried, and you chose to cut contact with me. No, Tyler said firmly, his voice growing strong. I was 17 when I aged out of foster care with no family support, and I was 20 when I hired an investigator to find you, only to be told you died in a plane crash. He pulled a folder from his backpack and handed it to Michael. These are copies of all the documents, the court papers you signed, the fake death certificate someone provided. Michael's hand shook as he opened the folder. Tyler was going through a difficult phase, and I thought I was getting straight A. I didn't come here for money or revenge or to break up anyone's family. I came here because I discovered that my mother. I've worked 2 jobs for the past 5 years to put myself through community college. I live in a studio apartment that costs most of my income. I've had no family support, no safety net, no one to call when things got difficult. He paused, his voice softening. But I've also learned that I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. Oh dear, my sister-in-law Patricia spoke up from across the room, her voice full of genuine sympathy. We had no idea, because my mother made sure of that. Rebecca was. I had a new life, a new family. I couldn't have my past following me around complicating things. The honesty of that statement hit the room like a physical blow. Several people actually stepped back as if Rebecca's words were contaminated. So you just erased him, Nathan? And I chose my future. You chose yourself, Tyler said with devastating simplicity. You chose your own comfort over your child's well-being. Michael set the folder down on the coffee table and looked at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but complete recognition of who she really was. Half of everything in this house is mine, half of your assets, half of your retirement. You can't just throw me out. Actually, Michael said with grim satisfaction, I can. The prenup you insisted on works both ways, Rebecca. If either spouse commits fraud or engages in behavior that materially misrepresents their character, abandoning your child and faking your own death to hide it from your new family seems like material misrepresentation to me, Michael continued. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings. I watched Rebecca look around the room searching for even one sympathetic face. She found none. Even the relatives. All of you have no idea what you're throwing away. A liar and a child abandoner, Tyler spoke up. I think he showed them pictures of the small apartment he was so proud of, the first place that had ever truly belonged to him. But what struck me most was how naturally he fit into our family dynamic. He had Michael's dry sense of humor. Watching my grandson and his half-brother discover their connection was like watching. Tyler had transferred to a school closer to us, and Michael was helping him with tuition. Nathan had convinced him to move into the guest room at his apartment, claiming he needed a. But perhaps the most satisfying change was in my relationship with my family. Harper, not Evelyn, but Grandma, a designation that acknowledged his place in our family structure while respecting the relationship he'd built with my son and grandson. I think we're almost ready. Good strange or bad strange? Definitely. Good. He paused, then added quietly. You did the hard part, I told him. You survived. You built a life for yourself. The sound of their voices, now joined by Tyler's laugh, filled my house with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. As we sat down to dinner that Sunday, I looked around the table at my son, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you.